don't think this is going to work. I mean, maybe it could. A pot that's big enough to put an engine block in, made for food service, is about $175. This $30 trash can, 20-gallon steel, galvanized steel. Problem is it doesn't hold water. And I'm going to try a little experiment here and do something I've never done before. I mean, I should know if I should be able to do this. I should know. But I don't have any muriatic acid. All I have is the same kind of flux you can get at the hardware store. And I don't know if that's going to allow me to be able to solder these joints together and make this thing hold water or not, but I'm going to find out.
The reason I'm undertaking this adventure, and you might have heard me mention, I'm throwing my block away in this trash can because it's a 4G63 piece of junk.
I'm just going to test a little spot first.
No, that's not really it. I need to make this thing hold water because we're going to boil my block with some carrots and potatoes. I don't think that's it either. Oh yeah, I'm doing this for the final cleaning prior to assembly. I'm using lead-free solder here, but zinc is really toxic, and I know this, so I'm holding my breath or Bluetooth breathing just for this little spot here. You can see the smoke that I'm talking about. Those are the oxides leaving, and after that stops, you don't really have that much of a problem with it. And you don't hear me say it, but that seemed to work. The solder flowed, so I'm going to go ahead and flux this whole thing up and take it outside. Read posts or talk to people, and they tell you you can boil your block in a trash can. I think they're mistaken. If there's someone out there on a video with a metal trash can that holds water, then I'm going to go out on a limb and claim they did something nifty to have to seal it up. There's lots of tiny gaps along the rolled seams. They're going to leak if you fill them up with liquid, and because most sealants or epoxies won't survive being boiled, you're going to need to have something tougher. It's very possible to solder galvanized materials, but nobody who's serious about doing a good job at it is ever going to use this plumber's flux for it. This flux can work on nickel, but sealing pipes is a lot different than making sheet metal hold water. It doesn't let the solder flow deep enough into the joint, and you want your flux to flow inside everywhere water could flow. Additionally, solder doesn't like filling large gaps. It's possible, but with the combination of all the not quite good enough solutions for making this work, yeah, it didn't. Need a better flux. So the next day I got my hands on a gallon of muriatic acid from my local hardware store. It's used for etching concrete. If the solder doesn't fill the whole joint, then after you fill up the container, it's just going to flow around wherever it can leak until it finds a place to get out, which is why I soldered every single joint inside and out after the previous night's attempt. Applying acid as I moved along and using a 100-watt soldering iron instead of a torch so I could localize the heat better and didn't melt all the solder inside and out, leaking everywhere from having too much heat. I was able to reflow everywhere I've already been and to try to form an even more consistent bead across the parts once it stopped flowing or tried to puddle on me. Now let's try that again. Nah, still got leaks. Those aren't gaps. The trash can is side lit. That's just a reflection of the night sky off the shiny solder. I probably contaminated it with the wrong flux the first time, making things more difficult than they need to be, so fine. I'll just reflow all the solder joints yet again, both sides, using the right flux again. It's like every single time I fix it in one spot, the problem seems to move somewhere else or it's flowing along a seam. Did I get it this time?
We'll let that sit for a bit.
No.
Barely anything. Oh no. Still got one. More than one. Okay.
Okay, fine. Forget localizing the heat. At this point, I had used 5 of the 8 ounces of solder that I bought, so this time I reflowed the bottom with the torch. Forgetting that whole localizing heat thing, let's reflow it all, keeping it flat so that the solder doesn't run out of the outside edge. I did get a few places to collapse under the heat, and I filled them back out again with the last 3 remaining ounces of solder. If that doesn't hold, I'm done trying. I'm going to add an extra layer of insurance, though. I think people are saying trash can when they really mean oil drum. Provided that I did at least as good of a job as any of my last 3 attempts, then if I have a leak, then this epoxy paint should last long enough for me to complete what I'm trying to do. I'm determined to boil a block in a trash can just to match the legend.
I cheated. Alright? I think the hoses froze. No. Got to move. This could take a while.
So add it all up, 30 bucks for a trash can, 25 bucks worth of solder, $7 propane cylinder, $20 soldering iron that was garbage fresh out of the box, an $8 bottle of acid, the epoxy paint to cheat with, and bring your own PPE at whatever cost because it's toxic, and spend 3 days trying to get it to seal. I left out a $5 can of paste flux, but I'm at $95 now with time invested, and it took just as long as shipping to do all this.
Nice. That's good enough. We're about done with that. I've got this old propane burner here from 1954, and I've got, you see, I've got the safety valve clamped open for safety. That's what, see, it's still got the safety valve. So I'm going to use this thing. I need to get rolling. There's a big old snowstorm coming, and I'm going to fill this up with, I'm going to start with 10 gallons of distilled water.
15 gallons of distilled water is about 25 bucks with tax these days.
Don't cross the stream.
I'd rather pour it straight out of the jug onto the ground than to pay to heat it first. So I hope this thing lasts long enough to get the job done.
I said 10 gallons.
And the reason for that is I don't know how much the block is going to displace.
I don't think I need this much. The block's 14 inches tall, so let's see if that water level's already there. It's going to displace a bunch of that. We're at a foot right now, so 9 gallons is a foot.
Really, the block is 15 inches tall when it's standing up long ways, and you'll want the water level to be higher than that once the block's actually in it. So 10 gallons is where I'm going to start out.
We got fire, baby! Yes, we got fire, baby. We got fire. Now we will see soon how big of a disaster of an idea this is. If the trash can can hold up to the abuse or the weight of my block. Yep. It does look like I got a little leak here. I guess now I get to the bargaining phase of my recovery. You know, I guess like even if this gets up to 2 drops a second, that actually is only 1/10 of a gallon per hour. Where that would also be 0.37885. I think 0.378541 liters. Yeah, so almost 1/4 of a liter an hour. In the big picture of things, that's nothing. So I'll get all the way through. Yeah, that would take let's see here. Yeah, it would take 150 hours to leak all the way out. We're good. All right, 15 gallons, 150 hours. We're good. Good times. I'm going to go ahead and let that cook, and when that comes up to temperature, we'll throw a block in it.
The can I'm using is only 20 inches across at the bottom, and I need all that girth. Sure, the block's only 14 or 15 inches tall or wide, but it's not round. It's kind of pointy on 8 or 10 sides. So to match those dimensions and buy a pot for cooking food that's that size, you're going to wind up spending between 150 to 200 bucks online for that 30-gallon pot. Either way you go, I just hope that I get away with doing this twice with this, and then I have a really nice metal trash can at the end for the shop once I'm finished. Recycle, reuse, right?
Don't you even worry about all that. None of that matters.
It's not a secret, it's just not relevant.
This is the second time I've opened this thing for you.
This one's fresh back from being cleaned and having its crank and rods fitted, and it's how I received it. I cut it open in the last video.
Really, this came out amazing. Not sure, but it looks to me like this might have been electro-cleaned, which would be an electrolysis process. It really did do a phenomenal job. However this came clean, it came very clean. I mean, but it's still not the final clean, as you can see right there. There's still a whole lot that this thing does need attention-wise, and I'm about to give it to it.
I'm going to pop the caps off and remove the bearings in the same order the caps came off in so they don't get all mixed up. They've been coated to meet the requirements of my crankshaft, so their order's very important. You might have noticed how struggle-free those mains fasteners were to remove. They weren't torqued, they were just snug for storage in transit. Pay attention to every single little detail like this because everything tells a story. There's a quiz currently being employed here. I don't need to boil bearings, so these things have to go. I need to clean up everything behind them after what comes next. If the bearing caps would just come off of here, I forget how tough these ARP main studs make it to pull these caps off.
Come on out of there.
I can't get it out.
Never give up. Just use my Excalibur skills on this center main. These bearings are all going to get cleaned by hand. I laid them out the exact same way they came off. The bearings are in that same order, and they'll go right back the same way. I'm putting it back together the same way that I found it for now. I have to clean up a few more things on this one before I can really even start the cleaning, but that's fine because that water's only starting to simmer. It's not quite ready yet. I left myself another thing to still have to do first, and that's good because watched pots don't boil. I'll be lucky if I can get it to boil at all. It's 20 degrees outside without the wind chill. Of course, I'm talking about the block's main oil galley mod. This Galant's never received it before. That's something I always want to do whenever I have the opportunity to my engines. Lots of crust and sharp edges exist in the main oil groove on these blocks, and I covered this in another video that I linked in the description that covers this in a lot more detail, and it's why I use the back of the X-Acto knife handle instead of the blade for this. But in a nutshell, I just make this cast area of the block's main oil galley smooth, and I round off the sharp edges right where it turns inside the block, so as not to introduce any turbulence into the oil stream right at the place where all the oil flow starts. And I cannot think of any possible thing that can ever go wrong from you performing this whenever you have access to this. You can't hurt anything unless you use carbides to do all your cutting and you somehow trench that oil somewhere that it doesn't belong. You have to try to screw this one up. I'm just using sandpaper rolls here because they do the least harm the slowest. If you're worried about carbides, then do it this way instead. I only used one layer of painter's tape to do it with this method, and it was enough to prevent damage from any slip-ups. It just takes 7 or 8 of these sandpaper rolls to make it all smooth like this. The earplugs and the tape were enough protection to avoid making a bigger mess of it than I needed to make. It doesn't matter because we're going to boil it anyway, but the tape is worth the protection, and it doesn't take any time to do it. Let's go check on that water temperature, shall we?
Ooh, it's getting pretty warm. Ooh, I'm liking that, yeah. Still burning. Propane's still going.
It bothers me that I can't pull a blue flame out of it, but it's working. I was blessed with an opportunity to request assistance from machinists who are way out of my league in real life. I will tell you this by far is the best work that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And this is exactly what I paid for. Definitely paid for it, waited eagerly in line behind a lot of other somebodies to do it too. Worth every penny. The high-low delta of these finishes on all of these bores, the deck, and the bearing journals are all perfection and only the beginning of the evidence of the attention to detail I was provided with. So I'm glad that I get to show you all of this because it's on a level so much higher than I've ever been able to operate. Mains torque specs and torque sequence stamped right there into the block for me. This is art. I'm eternally grateful and would sing their praises all day long, but it wouldn't help them at all if I did it, not in any way. I know a lot of you are going to ask me, but it's just the hill I'm going to have to die on going forward. Fully and totally fueled by my gratitude and respect. I'm lucky and I know it. Please let me keep it. Fire's out. You might notice my truck is a lot closer too. Well, there's a good reason for that. There's another propane cylinder in the back of my truck. Like I said, fire's out. Can't have that. You might remember we started doing the setup for this morning. It's night. It's cold-er. I'm out here with my trash can changing propane tanks. I want to show you my goods. So basically I'm just going to clean the block using basic staple necessities. You notice one of these is straight, one of these is bent. I have a solution for that. A little chamois sponge thing. This is a mitt, and this is going to be really hot water. So this is going to hurt, and this is the pain that I will endure for all of your entertainment. That's what I'm going to be using right there to get it all sudsy, and then we're going to rinse it off, get it nice and hot in the distilled water bath to let it fully lift and cure out all of the funkiness. Good times. Man, I looked. Couldn't find a straight-handled standard toilet brush at Walmart anywhere. Aside from these, they only got fancier. Easy fix with a heat gun, though, because this is how I straighten the other one out. This kind of plastic is extremely malleable with heat, but I'm doing this because I need 2 brushes to cover the difference in diameters between the mains and balance shaft holes versus the cylinder bores. I don't want to risk scratching anything. I have to work fast once that bath starts, so having all the necessary brushes ready to go and fitting in advance saves time. Let's get this party started. First thing I'm going to do is start off with some steaming hot water. Enough Dawn to change its color. We're going to start with the brushes. And not these either. Starting out, cleaning with the oil galley brushes first. I want those nice and soapy. You can't get the whole thing with it on the engine stand, but we'll spend more time in there later. For the pre-soak, you're not going to have to scramble so hard, really. It's going to hurt. It's hot.
Water's 170 degrees.
But you're gonna have to turn it up way higher later.
Ouch.
I'm actually grateful that it's snowing right now because of the lack of humidity. It's falling out of the air in solids. There's gonna be no condensation and the part's practically gonna flash dry itself once we're done. But right now, with the block's current temperature, there's no condensation occurring at all, and the soap isn't gonna be what's flash evaporating from it. Just the water part will. Aside from trying to boil water outside, these conditions are actually ideal. I still haven't managed to get this to boil yet. Get the mains, get the bores, get the deck, get the flanges, get the oil return galleys, get the bolt holes. Rub and scrub every square millimeter of exposed metal with this and keep everything soaking wet the whole time. I got something to set it on so that it doesn't get dirty while I'm doing this. I leave the engine stand mount on it. It gives me a handy jig that I can use to extract the block with because it's tall enough to fit the handle on it while it's in the can. It doesn't help me much putting it in there really, but I bet it's going to be a big help getting it out there while it's steaming hot.
Still about 2 gallons from being full.
The block's going to pull a ton of heat out of this bath, but I'm glad that part's over with.
Need another gallon.
I grossly overestimated how much water was going to be displaced.
Almost there.
That didn't look like it did anything. Neither did that. I missed by 4 gallons. With cold water and the block added, this is going to take hours. The hottest I could get it before was 175. I'd prefer a rolling boil, but that'll do fine if I can get it back there again.
162 degrees.
All I can do now is wait. It's snowing. What else am I going to do?
It's coming back up.
After only about 45 minutes and with the fresh propane cylinders on it, it came up a lot quicker than I expected. By the time an hour and a half passed, I was right back at the temperature before we put the block in. Seems to heat faster with the block in it because that's better than it's done all day. Probably convection through the block from sitting on the bottom of the can. It's nice that the lid almost closes with the engine stand mount on it because putting the lid on it also helps it heat faster too.
176, 175. This side's like 168, which is weird. Must be the wind. Yep, 175. Let her roll.
This is how you go from a whole case of brake cleaner down to a fraction of one single can of it. Does it take longer? Probably. Do you have more brain cells left at the end of it? Yes. Maybe even more if you figured out how to make a trash can hold water. There's plenty of people who have rebuilt engines and have never done this. This is not a part of a repair process. This is a 0-mile reset. The block is all bare cast iron. There's no paint. There's nothing on it. When a block's machined, cutting oils are going to get used. Honing involves stones. All that stuff penetrates the casting and it ends up stuck all over the inside of the block. There's stuff you can reach and stuff that you can't to get it out, but the stuff that you can't reach, you have to get creative, and that's what boiling this does because oil floats. Without the oil, any abrasives or funk that's stuck in there isn't going to have anything to hold on to, and the thermal process of heating the block makes its microscopic pores expand and let go of everything in the surface that could have been thermally trapped there during machining. It's like giving your friction surfaces a facial. But now I have to get a boiling hot engine block past the edge of that can somehow to get it out. I figured that I'd just back my truck up to it and stand on the tailgate where I've got enough room to clear it without destroying my back. Only problem is, I've been walking around on wet, icy, soapy concrete, and I have no traction on this tailgate, even with the bed liner. Brainwave, use the midget stripper pole. I'm tall, so I can brace myself against it and bend fully over to snatch the block out of there without falling out of the truck and busting my head open. Another thing to save your back, engine stands are lighter than engine blocks, so bring the stand to it. Don't try to feed your block to it. You do this when it's hanging from a chain, so do this when it's on your workbench, tailgate, whatever. Don't blow yourself up doing it the other way. Now I gotta go full scramble mode, because as cold as it is out here, this thing is drying fast. Just like how the hot tank has funk in it, so does the water I just pulled it out of. But I got my soapy water now with this thing fresh out of its facial, and we're gonna do the deep pour cleaning. Pampered 4G63s here. You'll notice that I even get the dual brush action going, one in the main, one in the borehole. Do everything you can to keep the whole thing wet and soapy and repeat at least double what you did for that pre-soak. Flip it, turn it in every direction, repeat the oil galleys, get it all. I'm sacrificing some of the quality of my work in order to film this, but do not let it dry. Hot means you have to scramble, so keep it wet and use buckets if you have to. Now for the fun part.
Brand new, fresh, clean microfiber cloth, WD-40, fresh can. Don't even let it dry. Get the bores. get the deck, get all the machine flame surfaces.
I always buy a fresh can for this and test it first because this is a step that you can't afford to have go wrong.
Don't even let it dry. It's gonna be fuzz all throughout this one, but that's all right, as long as you get it good and oily. Why aren't you recording? You were recording. So you want to get this all throughout it. Get that surface sealed up. Lift it.
For the past minute, you've heard me repeat myself in the video versus what I said in the voiceover. The voiceover part was for you. What I said in the video was me giving myself orders and cheerleading and criticizing myself for screwing up the camera work. The reason I'm so intent about not letting it dry is that any impurities in the water get deposited once the water leaves. So the WD-40's goal is to displace the water and penetrate the surface to keep that stuff out. Yeah, it puts an oil film right back on the block, and I just worked hard to remove it, but now there's no machining remnants, and this oil film serves as a clean preservative that's easy to remove and completely safe even if I didn't. You'll probably notice that I didn't do anything to the outer casting layer of the block. I didn't oil any of that, and that's kind of chalky and off-colored looking. I don't care. The factory painted it black, and I will too. But the finish on here is completely blowing my mind. I can't find evidence of any machine ever being on here. I don't see any cutter marks anywhere. This is perfection exemplified. This thing's going to love its new head gasket, and this is the turning point. It's the point when I get to start putting things back on it and into it. I told you my plans. Let's get to work. You'll notice very quickly the outside of the block has a brownish hue to it. That's what will happen if you let it air dry. Everywhere you let it dry. Everywhere that you didn't oil it, and I needed an example of that to show you. I just needed one that wasn't going to hurt anything is all. There's still tons of funk all throughout this block. It may have let go of the block, but it's all still in there. If you've been watching these coffee filters coming out with dark black spots, it's a great illustration of how looks can be deceiving and not to take the appearance of your parts for granted. Just because you boiled it and it looks clean, it's not until you've covered every single surface with something white and witnessed nothing on it, especially everywhere there's a machine surface or a flange where you're going to have parts pressed or glued in. You know, I started with the core plug holes because I needed to seal this block up and paint it as soon as possible. It's my responsibility to protect the casting now that I've put it through all this, and I want the core plugs to be there first because there's no point in painting the inside of my coolant system. That's not helpful. There's a whole lot of other stuff that I don't want to paint that I have to mask off too, and you're going to see me just about use every kind of tape in the process. I'm going to clean and scrub everything down that I'm going to stick it to. The point of oil drying a hot iron thing is that it eliminates the rust and discoloration that occurs as it comes in contact with oxygen. But now that temperature and humidity are normalized, it's safe to strip it all off with denatured alcohol. An added benefit of using it as a drying agent is that WD-40 is also a powerful cleaning agent. So it's a great step in the process. This is the only stage of your assembly really where it belongs unless your engine stands squeaking, and if you put it on there, now you have to clean it off. Make no mistake, final cleaning of an engine prior to assembly is a time-consuming, weightlifting, acrobatic, and aerobic exercise where you perfect wipe on, wipe off. There's no shame in paying someone else to do this work, unless of course you're the one being paid to do it. Then it's either shameful or it's like baller status. It's a lot of work, and we're not even halfway done with it yet. The white coffee filter is your guide. That's your boss. Your boss is telling you good job whenever it comes back white. It's your responsibility to cover every oiled surface, or else you're going to flow trash through all your expensive parts and brand new bearings the first time you turn this engine over, and that would be stupid. But if you're the assembler, that means that it's 100% your responsibility to hit all of it and pass the white coffee filter inspection. That's when it tells you that it's clean, and that's who your boss is. Yeah, I thought I was done too there. Boss said keep going. That's just how it is. The machine surfaces don't usually put up too much of a fight, but the cast stuff is a whole different story. I oiled the living daylights out of the inside of the crankcase. Anything that's oiled has to be wiped. But that's the main reason I didn't oil the outside of the block. I know that whatever happened there can be brushed away with a steel wire brush before I paint it. Oil kind of would have made that suck. Descaling all the casting with a steel brush needs to happen either way, especially before you begin wiping on anything, but I'm going to rough up the outside of it, etch it with the alcohol before it gets painted, and you don't have to pass the white coffee filter test on what you're going to paint, just on what you're going to oil. This bare casting's beautiful. I wish I could just clear coat it, but it's sticking with the OE appearance. Before I plug it up and paint it though, I want to clean up all the threads so that it's ready to go. I run a chase through every hole to clean and verify the integrity of the thing that I'm about to assemble. That's important to me. You've seen how often I run my fasteners all the way down by hand. That's how well they fit together back when the factory built it. So that's the standard that I always hold myself to in a restoration. Using chases instead of a tap means all the material and the structural integrity of the original threads remains in place. If the hole needs more than that, this is the tool that's going to tell you. All I can say about what I learned from being the guy on the tactile feedback end of the chases is that the blocks, this particular block, it's an exquisite specimen for its age and service history. I'm going to have no trouble attaching anything to these threads. This one's going to be nice. Next, I want to brush out everywhere on the outer casting where I can fit a wire brush. Got to hit the dipstick tube, the centering holes, and the head oil return galleys for, really good. Clear all that scale out of those, and then get all the WD off the deck of the block, of course. Do you see what I mean about the finish here? Where are the cutter marks? All I'm seeing are reflections in cast iron, and that is not easy to do. There isn't just professionalism demonstrated in the accuracy of the work I've requested to have performed. It's clearly demonstrated in the results of the symbiotic relationship between the machinist and his machine, and how it's maintained and set up to cut. This right here is the quality of a cut on a deck surface that everyone should strive to achieve. I'm impressed. They would gladly have done all this work for me, and I would have enjoyed that too, but this is what you want to see. We get to do this one together. We already got the mains and the inside of the block cleaned up, but I got to strip the bores out too. WD isn't going to be my break-in lubricant after all. I don't want to make everything brown. These were stone finished and subjected to all the same kind of funk as everything else all along here, so the coffee filters are my boss again. That came out stellar, and we'll have to take a better look at that once I've got it oiled up yet again. For now, I want to get the caps out of here though. Those need an extensive cleaning, but I want to get this block plugged up and painted to seal up the outer casting. I have to keep all this in the right order too. That's why I put the block in the same orientation I had it before, and the caps back exactly the way they were when they came off the first time. Now that they're out of the way, I gave all the studs and the cap flange surfaces vigorous cleanings, and if I were smart, I would have carried that right on through the rest of the cleanup of the main oil galley right afterwards, but I was too one-track focused on getting it painted, so we'll all just go ahead and, let me make that mistake, okay? It's not even the last time I've got to clean these, and it's not the first either, but incapable of controlling myself, I just went ahead and started taping up the block for paint. I used 3 kinds of tape for this all in all. I used painter's tape on the oil pump side for an easy peel, the polyester tape on the deck surface because it's good at keeping bleeds in the paint out of its edges, surprisingly better than painter's tape, which implies that it's made to keep paint out, right? It's an expensive masking job to use the polyester stuff, but slightly overkill too compared to the painter's tape. We'll get to the third tape later. Let's drive these core plugs in. A 6-bolt block takes 9 of the same size core plugs, and in this bag I've got all of my small parts for the rest of section 11130 to round out this group, including all 9 of the core plugs, as well as all 8 brand new washers for the oil squirters, check valves, the pins, etc. that are all right here in this bag. I like to install those after the rotating assembly, so we're not going to be messing with those in this video. But in addition to those, I've also got the main oil galley plug, all the pins and the bushings that align the oil pump, the transmission and the cylinder head, and the rear main seal cover to the block. That's what's going on right there in that bag. But my mission is to install all 9 of these plugs into their new homes, including the ones around the other side of the block, so I have to take this block back off the stand to complete that. Let's start with the ones we can easily get to right now. Again, there's your part number for a 6-bolt, times 9. I'm using Indian head gasket shellac as an extra insurance against leaks. I apply it to the back of the plug on the 90 where it's rolled, and halfway up the outer edges all the way around. I want this sealant to interfere with the hole that I'm installing it into and to stick all the way around. The plug should seal the hole up all by itself without it, but this stuff hardens and it's going to create an additional seal beyond the plug being compressed into that hole. One of the tools I bought years ago for this was a core plug driver set, and these are awesome because they keep the plug centered while providing an outer flange to control the installation depth. core plugs should be installed flush with the hole, and that's what this ensures. There's nothing particularly fancy or complicated about doing this except for making sure that the hole is clean and smooth enough to seal with the plug. But on the 4G castings, one of the core plug holes doesn't let you use the plug driver due to a protrusion in the casting for a bolt hole. It interferes with the plug driver. You could easily grind a relief in your plug driver to clear this, or you could just switch to the socket that you're already using to do the exact same thing and just be really careful to drive it in straight and not too far. That's what everyone else does. See, it's that one right there. They don't come out as pretty and perfect as the one that the plug driver fits, and if that's worth something to you, then by all means, make a relief cut in your plug driver. To get the last two, we've got to get the block off the stand, but that whole side of the engine received none of the love the rest of it just got, so it's got like ground zero up. I've got to redo all that brushing and scrubbing and wiping just to get us back there to that point again, and there, we're done. Mask the side of the thing for the easy peel now, and let's just go back to those other two core plugs. I treat those no differently than the other 7. Still using the Indian head and all that stuff, just drive them right on in. And with that out of the way, I masked the entire crankcase at the bottom half of the engine with some plastic and packaging tape. I wanted to ensure a good tight seal with the plastic, and it doesn't take poly tape to do that. Packing tape sticks fine to cast iron too, and any residue that it leaves behind is easy to remove, so I consider it a win-win. It's going to stick to the painter's tape long enough for what I've got to do with it. Earplugs go in all the bolt holes I just cleaned up. It's not the best solution, it's just one of the cheapest, most abundant, and effective ways of me dealing with this. I'm using Rust-Oleum high-temperature engine enamel, in black of course, and it's what I can get that most accurately duplicates what the factory did to the block the first time. Some of my masking isn't correct, but the factory blocks are barely painted to begin with as it is, so anything that I'm doing to it's an improvement. Some of you might be upset with me for painting my core plugs, but it doesn't matter. If you don't, they just rust within a year anyway. They're zinc-coated, sure, but that's a sacrificial layer. I did many light coats to get where I wanted it before following it up with a medium coat to wet it all. Turn the block back on different faces, make it face different directions while you're painting during the light coats to ensure that you don't end up with any light spots. I ended up with 3 in the long run, but I can touch them up later. It's time to peel this thing, pluck out all the earplugs, and if you can't tell, I'm in a little bit of a hurry to get back in there and do some real damage with that fraction of a can of carb cleaner that I was talking about earlier. With these methods, this is the only place where you might want to use something as harsh as this chemically, and you probably won't want to do that in an enclosed space like this, but you want this to be sterile clean when you're finished. And you need to be aware that these main journal oil holes are relieved, meaning that inside the bore there's actually a smaller orifice. So it's going to take 2 different size brushes to finish these off. Use big brushes on the oil squirter bores. Wash all that stuff down into the main oil galley, because next we're going to use some fishing skills to clean out the main oil galley. This is a real knot. Watch your own YouTube videos. This is reflex for me. I can do this blindfolded at sea. This one's handy because the harder you pull on it, the harder it's going to grab. I'm using a length of 20-pound test mono to tie off a wadding that I can pull through the main oil galley and scrub out any of the dirt, filth, rust, and funk that might have ever wandered in there. See what's in there sort of thing, It's, fishing. Yeah. Of course, because it's me, there's coffee filters and earplugs involved in my homemade fishing tackle here. I'm using compressed air to blow the loose end through the main, but I missed the other side of the block and found an oil squirter hole. If you hold some tension on it, it'll go straight through every time. Use another quick spritz of the carb cleaner and let's see what's inside of there. Oh my goodness, look at what just came out of there. So if you ever decided to send a block without cleaning out the main oil galley, that's the kind of stuff you missed. I bet there's plenty of stuff in the Chesapeake that would bite hard on something like this. Certainly wouldn't hold up for too long out there. And this isn't the only way there is to do this either. Maybe you got some kind of special absorbent scrubbing brush of some kind that fits in that hole. I don't. You could make a wadding and ram it through with a long wooden dowel. There's lots of other ways to do this, but it's what I settled on. I applied the same rules as I do to anything else. Keep running it through until it comes back out clean and white. This absolutely worked. And look, right here, I'm retying my reel knot because I kept breaking it trying to get it loose and reusing it again. Probably would have been easier with 50-pound test. Reel knots are life skills. This knot is the difference between eating and not eating, so learn it. It's also, it's not going to leave your homemade fishing lure stuck halfway in the middle of your main oil supply either if you do it right. So now with this thing cleaned up inside and out, I'm going to go ahead and put the main bearings back in the block so that I can clear up half my workspace and have the room necessary to do what's left. You'll notice that I have the block once again oriented the exact same way. If you think you might have mixed up your bearings, you can observe things like the differences in the mains, whether they all have an oil hole or a whole oil groove that runs their length, because once these bearings get torqued into the mains like this, they were previously, it leaves imprints in these things on the backs of the bearings that shows you what was there. 7 bolts are a little bit more unique than the 6-bolt mains. God forbid you end up questioning yourself. That's something that can help, though, if you find yourself there. I still have to clean up the caps, the suitcase handles, the center main with it, the wire brush and full wipe-on, wipe-off treatment on every single surface. I got to pay extra close attention to the bearing journals and the mating surfaces. I don't dare get the wire brush near any of those. You should be able to just wipe those clean and one at a time put your bearings back in the way you found them, if you're in my circumstances, that is. The reason why I'm being so meticulous about the bearing order is that this is not just a standard set of bearings. They're not all the same size. You might notice that there's a difference in their color. These bores were precision measured, and my ACL bearing set was calico coated to fit. The crank has already been fit and tested because I cleaned the plastic gauge residue off the bearings when I was doing all this, and I have zero questions as to whether or not it's right. If and only if it goes back together the exact same way, of course. So by all means, I'm going to plastic gauge it when it's finished, not to check the machinist, but just to make sure that I got it back to whatever he gave me after all this is over. So here we are, time to put these things back on. If we were all paying attention, is this how we do this? Yes, I said earlier that it didn't arrive torqued. Those were put there for storage and transit, I said. The last thing that this thing did with the mains torqued on it was pass a plastic gauge test with the crankshaft in it, and it wasn't taken back apart afterwards. My machinist did not and would never make this mistake. I'm the one who's expected to get this right. I'm sure there's going to be tons of deleted comments from people who reached this point of the video or proclaiming that the mains were backwards. This was the quiz all along. They were backwards this whole time and I knew it. Nothing got mixed up due to being methodical, and it's why that's important. You gotta be methodical. I felt this is a good example because it's the tiny details, from the elusive bearing prints when you're in trouble, the existing load on fasteners, which, tell a story and you'll miss out on that with power tools, to the mundane things like simply following the built-in factory markings plainly provided for you. Don't take any of what's there for granted. Use whatever skills you have to ensure that you can scrub every surface that's oiled, and be creative, get it all clean. But this is how I final clean and prep my block. This is section 1130. There's some fresh ARP moly lube for the fasteners once the crank's ready to go in and replace what I just boiled and cleaned off of them. I mentioned earlier the oil squirters go on after the rotating assembly, and that's so that I can check them for clearance with the piston skirts. There's a complete set of factory balance shaft bearings there. The block stud, main oil galley plug, case plug, dowel pins, and bushings. I got everything ready to go for assembly right there, and truth be told, some of these pieces really still need to be cleaned up, like that rear main seal cover. But in order to even use that stuff, it's just one of many parts groups involved with an assembly. There's 11100, which I love because it's just a tube of goo. 11110's a valve cover. 11120 went by so fast you didn't even feel it. We put that whole head together fast. But what I really need to do, I've got to get a rotating assembly sorted out and do a final cleaning on the crankshaft first as well. That process doesn't look the same. The block's ready to go. But just like a case of carb cleaner costs now, it still costs hundreds of dollars to DIY everything that you just saw. It takes weeks to do it with video, but no matter how you prep your block, this work still takes days to do correctly at a sane pace. It's worth every penny to pay somebody else to do it for you, but if you can't, then you at least owe it to yourself to be thorough and to do it all right. Your final cleaning is not where you skimp. It's not complicated, but it's a process. And with that in my inventory complete, I'll show you an easy way to drive in the block bushings for the oil pump, transmission, head, and rear main seal cover. For the pins, you just tap those in with a hammer. My original ones are still there and there's no reason to mess with them. But you can drive the bushings in with a flange bolt, every single one of them. or a stud and a nut if you're a 2G guy and you have to deal with that 11mm thing. Lots of people just use a hammer, put something over it if you do that to prevent marring or distorting it. The studs drive right in with a double nut, and I prefer flange nuts because they have longer threads and are easy to put together and take apart. I'm going to put all the washers and the nuts back onto the main caps for safekeeping for now, but I'll lube and assemble all that later correctly once the crank's ready. Before I store it though, I just want to once again lube the bores all back up again, and now that it's all clean I can use ATF, which is what I actually do use for assembly. I'll be right back to this one again very soon, but I want it to stay pristine while it's under wraps waiting for its friends to arrive. You see what I mean about the bore finish here? The high-low delta of this cut, it's phenomenal. The kind of efficiency possible with this. It feels baby smooth, but the coffee filter tells another story. The science behind this cut is just the beginning of the tech involved in the rest of this build, and I can't wait to show you the rest. This has been a huge leap forwards making that happen, and I've exceeded my own expectations on how this would even turn out. It's taken years of hard work to shake all the right hands to see work like this come out, and I can never be more grateful with the help that I've received clearing this log jam from my production. The paint looks great, she came out clean as a whistle, the rust and funk is gone, the mains are ready to go, my inventory is complete, and now there's just a few more pieces to go over before I can bring you the whole assembly. Once that part begins, I get to really start cleaning out these drawers. I cleared out a bunch of stuff already in the last video just to fill them all right back up again with twice as much stuff, but we're going to end this problem once and for all. There's also a lot of other various engine bay things that are going to get cleaned up by various means depending on what they are and what they need. None of that's going to look anything like what you just saw in this video. What we're working on next is pretty obvious here, and none of those things are like what came out of the box originally when they were new either. They're all better than new, and you'll just have to come back next time, so stay tuned.